So first of all, thank you so much for taking the time today to speak.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
So I saw King Cohen the other night. It was wild. I loved it. It was
Great.
really well made. I'm sure everyone is going to enjoy seeing it. And yeah, it sheds a light on someone kind of an underdog in the business. And yeah, I think you handled it beautifully.
Well, thank you very much. And, the director, Steve Mitchell, really did a great job of finding, the movie out of what was, hours and hours and hours of footage.
Nice.
Larry's such a raconteur.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like an embarrassment of riches. It's like, okay, how do we, how do we sort of communicate to people who how do we be entertaining to people who know who he is, mm-hmm. and sort of be a primer for people who have no idea
right.
who he is, and sort of maybe expose folks who weren't aware of this type of independent filmmaking, kind of what that was all about. And Larry's just such a wonderful vehicle to kind of tell that tale of movies made a way that you just can't make them anymore.
Now, what is your fascination with Larry? Like, where did this admiration start? When did it begin?
Well, for me, it began. It's funny because most people come to Larry through the horror pictures or through the blaxploitation pictures. Mm-hmm. But when I was a teen and I was just becoming aware, sort of, that there's people behind, making movies, I'd rented a movie called Bestseller with James Woods and Brian Dennehy. And I remember loving the idea so much, this odd idea of kind of a hitman teaming up with not just a cop, but a cop author, to kind of go through this mystery and write a book. And I remember thinking, well, that's such a unique thing. Who wrote that? And that's kind of what led me down the path. And when I saw Larry Cohen's name, it then became, an opposite to the video store to rent pretty much everything he's ever done. And I was always surprised. And I think that's kind of Larry's ace in the hole. It's like you think you know what you're getting into because it's a genre movie and it typically has sort of rules and ideas of how the story typically goes. And Larry tends to subvert. You start down the road, oh, okay, this is a monster movie. And then it turns into sort of something else entirely in the middle of watching it. So there's always a surprise. And there's always a message, too. And that always kind of stuck with me, too.
What are some of your favorite movies of Larry's?
They jockey for position a lot. Typically, I'd say my favorite is probably Q.
Yeah.
But that trades places with God Told Me To quite a bit. And actually, as I've gotten older, the J. Edgar, Private Files of J. Edgar Hoover, I think, is a really good movie, too. But I like them pretty much all. I'm a big fan of The Ambulance, and but I think my favorites are Q and God Told Me To, because I think they kind of represent the strongest sort of motifs that Larry kind of works with.
Yeah, the urban cityscape of Manhattan it works in pretty much all of his movies. It's it's timeless. It's great.
Yeah, and actually, as you make me think about it, in both Q and God Told Me To, there's that urban crime procedural thing going on. In the case of Q, it's really the story of like a two-bit criminal who's kind of working through the city system. And if God Told Me To, it's a cop, kind of on the ground investigating a case. And in both cases, what starts off as like a New York City crime story becomes something, totally nuts.
Right. It's awesome.
Yeah.
So what was the research process like?
Well, Steve Mitchell, the director, came to me with the project, and then we decided we had to find a way to do it. Both of us were kind of already knowledgeable to some degree on Larry's career because we were fans, and also fans of the 70s and sort of through the mid-80s film. And Steve himself, co-wrote Chopping Mall and directed unit on that. Yeah. So, so we kind of know that universe a little bit, but really what it was, Steve would do his research and I would back it up a little bit as we would go out and do the interviews with everybody. And, it's almost like it researched itself because Larry's such a detailed storyteller, and his memory, is so sort of sharp regarding everything in his career. And then when we would talk to people, it would sort of be like they themselves are opening up all these old memories, and just stories would sort of lead to other stories and lead to other stories.
Wow.
So it was fascinating, to sit in on those interviews. And in some cases, you get to hear personally from some of my own cinematic heroes in addition to Larry. So it was a real treat.
Like, one of the reasons I decided to interview you was because of the film, was King Cohen. You actually interviewed two of my absolute favorite directors of all time, Joe Dante and John Landis.
Yeah.
What were they like?
I think the thing, first of all, both were incredibly gracious. Both guys have plenty to do without taking the time out to talk to us. And I think what I was struck by was I knew that they were fans of Larry's and that they appreciated Larry. They were involved in the Masters of Horror,
Right.
Mick Garris's series. Mm-hmm. I was struck by how much that they truly admired his work ethic and what he represented. It went deeper than just the casual, oh yeah, his movies are cool. I think at one point in the movie, John Landis says, Larry's really fertile with ideas that he wishes he was as fertile. And I thought, wow, that's kind of what struck me, was both of those guys in particular really admired the sort of Larry's career. And, I think Joe Dante even points out he's really one of the few guys. There's a couple, maybe like Carl Reiner and Mel Brooks, but the list is very small of people that sort of worked on the ground in live television in the late 50s, early 60s, and is still here and kind of traveled through, live television into series television in the 60s, into, 70s independent movies, and then, also writing big mainstream scripts like Phone Booth and Cellular. So it's such a unique career, and I think those filmmakers really kind of respected that journey.
Did you have a favorite interview that you did?
They were all pretty great because, as you can imagine, these personalities they're vivid personalities.
Right.
There's no door that we opened where it was sort of blasé. Everything was always interesting. Michael Moriarty in particular, because he hasn't done any interviews for anybody in such a long time. And I remember thinking, are we even going to get him? Is he going to talk to us? We traveled to Vancouver to interview him because he's in Canada. And he's chosen to be in Canada. It was kind of, after Law and Order, he sort of purposefully left the States and never came back here to act. So we kind of didn't know what we were going to get. And he couldn't have been more, more gracious. And so I think it was a lot like Larry himself. Everybody was so surprising,
Right.
Right down to Martin Scorsese, making time for us,
Yeah.
It was a real eye-opener. And Fred Williamson, oh my God, what a,
Great.
There's 3 documentaries in itself.
I know, I love the ending, where Larry's like, you can't cover this all in one documentary.
Well, he even says himself, it's like, you gotta do sequels, you have enough.
Yeah.
So,
King Cohen returns. Right?
Yeah. We're gonna have a healthy Blu-ray because we have so much stuff.
Nice.
So it'll be, we'll be able to put some of those things we couldn't include in the movie.
Great. Cool. All right. Are there any filmmakers who have influenced your craft?
As this is the first time out producing a feature of any sort for me. Me and my business partner, we are primarily a soundtrack label, La La Land Records.
Right.
But we've always been looking to kind of do other things, and this project made a lot of sense to us, not only because it was something that I was able to actually kind of execute as a producer, along with my producing partner, Dan McKeon,
Mm-hmm.
but also because there's a little bit of synergy in our customer base, kind of. Larry was such a big fan of film composers, and we're sort of a film composer label.
Right.
So we knew that, his relationship with Bernard Herrmann, and he talked a little bit about Nicolas Rocha and some of the other composers. So we knew that we were trafficking. We also do a lot of genre soundtracks, so we knew that we were kind of trafficking in a place where we could maybe find customers for the film. So I think sort of identifying that as a producer kind of was the key to getting started. But as far as influence, I mean, when you talk to Larry, and that's kind of surprising with the film, we've had people come up to us after, because we did a lot of those festivals and stuff last year. We'd have people come up who didn't know Larry at all and say, boy, we found that movie sort of, inspirational. Like, that guy is really, he just kind of makes it happen.
Right.
And I think, you couldn't help but be inspired talking to Larry, because he kind of did that. As far as the movies he directed and produced himself, he just sort of made those happen. He didn't care. He often jokes, like, he never even used a shot list or a call sheet. He doesn't. It's funny because while he writes, and he does write in the studio system on occasion, when he's directed his own movies, he's always just sort of done it in the face of everybody telling him, oh, well, you can't do this, or that's not the way you're supposed to do things.
Right.
And I tend to admire, I've always had such affection for the B-movie directors and producers, and I think I gravitate towards that.
Nice.
There's a lot of reasons maybe not to do a project, and those reasons not to do it often are the reasons why you absolutely should do it. So I think if I'm influenced at all as a producer, it's probably from the 70s and 80s sort of genre kind of filmmakers and producers. Your Brian Yuznas, who produced things like The Reanimator and stuff like that. So anyway.
Now, are there any other filmmakers or any other subjects you want to tackle in a documentary in the future?
In fact, Steve Mitchell and I have been talking about several different projects. Really trying to figure out which makes the most sense. It's often whichever you can get investors to sort of respond to. Sometimes leads the way.
Right.
So we hope to. The press reviews and stuff on the movie have been really good, so we hope to turn that into, whatever comes next.
Cool. Now I want to go back to La La Land Records. How did that company start?
I was good friends with MV Gerhardt. We've been friends for a long time. And I was working film development for a production company that's no longer around, and they were looking to expand their business into score soundtracks. Right. And at that time, MV was working over at Crescendo Records, so I knew somebody, a good friend of mine, who was actually sort of working for a soundtrack label. So we got together with this other company and did 2 or 3 albums for them. This is like back in 2001. And we sort of we looked at the model and like, well, we can do this, we can, and I was looking to get out of where I was, so to speak. And it was a long process. We started the label in 2002 and, worked all kinds of jobs in addition to the label for a very long time. Right. But just stuck with it, and it's about 17 years later. We're still releasing movie scores, and really the big fun with the label is going back and restoring older scores and expanding the amount of music. That's really the joy of the record label. To work on older John Williams scores and present them in full and so.
That's good. Who are some of your favorite composers?
I think it's a lot with a lot of people. It's kind of when you grow up, it's sort of what you hear is what influences you. I mean, I grew up in the 70s and 80s, so it's John Williams, kind of informs I can't think of any other composer at the time where it's like the movie and the score can't be separated from each other. You can't sort of think of one without the other. And
what about well, for me, I actually prefer Jerry Goldsmith.
Well, you took the words out of my mouth. As I got older, I started to appreciate perhaps Goldsmith even more. But it's a pretty, you know, it's an embarrassment of riches, basically. I mean, but I think between those two guys, and then I love a lot of the synth stuff that we grew up with. I'm a big fan of Harold Faltermeyer. I think some of those guys are incredibly underrepresented, you know. So we try and you know, do work from folks like that as much as we possibly can too.
Now you've done a lot of archived scores. I know you did a bunch of Danny Elfman scores from the late '80s through the '90s.
Yeah, sure.
Have you guys considered doing? Cause I know this was MCA, but did La La Land consider doing music for a darkened theater part 3?
No, it's only because a compilation projects like those are such a licensing. It becomes. Let me tell you this: it would become easier to actually do a full-blown release of the particular score in question, as opposed to trying to put a bunch of them together, because you're dealing not only with separate studios,
right?
You're dealing with separate record labels, because even though a studio, you know, does a movie, that doesn't mean that their internal record label did the release. So you're talking about several deals with several different studios, in addition to several deals with several different record companies in addition. It's not impossible, but it becomes, in today's market, it becomes a situation where you end up spending more than you're going to make per unit. But we've dabbled. I think the closest we've come is when we did Ferris Bueller. Because Ferris, there was never a soundtrack release for Ferris, period. So all the songs on the album, and I think there's about 8 or 9 of them, all those had to be separate artist deals in conjunction with the score deal from Paramount. So a lot of times it just becomes, you know, a legal question and a financial question.
I see.
But we got more Elfman coming, so if you're a fan, hang tight.
Huge fan.
Okay, all right. Well, you won't be disappointed. We're working on some cool stuff.
Very nice. So yeah, just last question. What advice do you have for aspiring filmmakers out there?
My advice is, and I can only point to myself, because I moved out here in the 90s. And I think at the time I was how should I say? I was sort of like trying to follow a model that had already been established. It's like, oh, well, maybe you can work in development and you can work your way up, you know, the chain this way. And I think as I've gotten older, I've realized that really isn't. I mean, there's a route to everything. Those traditional routes are valid, and people follow them all the time. But as I look back, and if I would tell somebody who's starting now, I would say, just find a way to do it. And if you can't do it at the scale that you want, then find something that is at the scale that you want. Find something that's in the scale that you can handle. Because the technology today, you know, I remember, you know, in college, it was like, oh, geez, you know, how are we going to deal with affording to make a project on a 16-millimeter camera? Or, you know, VHS looks like crap. You know, and today, the technology is there for you, and it's cheap.
Right.
So I would say focus on content, because content is king. You have to have something that people, you know, are going to want to see. But don't pay attention to the roadblocks as much. You know, pay attention to what you can do and go do it. And that's, you know, because at the end of the day, it's kind of Larry's story too. It's you know, find a way to get it done. And if you can't get it done at the level you want to get it done, then find a way to do something you're equally as passionate about, but something that's potentially within your means, and just go for it. Just do it. Start talking to friends. Start talking to family. You know, we did financing on King Cohen piece by piece, a documentary. I didn't think my first feature as a producer was going to be a documentary. But you know what? The model of making a documentary fit us perfectly because if you shoot a narrative film, your schedule is as such that you've got to shoot usually your whole movie within a couple of weeks.
Right.
If you do a documentary, you can finance and shoot, You don't have to worry about, I'm not going to get the actors back, or I'm not, you can schedule your subjects and find your subjects. And even in the case of a documentary, the longer production schedule is better because you collect more people along the way. J.J. Abrams did his thing at the last minute, a year and a half after we started.
Wow.
He just, it was an ideal project. I would say if you're a producer looking for that first thing and you haven't even thought of doing a documentary, well, consider it. Find a subject you like, something you think that other people will be interested in too, and maybe try that instead.
Cool. Great advice. Thank you. So yeah, Matt, our studio is based in Huntington, Long Island. If you're ever in New York, we'd love to have you stop by for an in-person. Be great.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're always invited. And I just want to thank you again for your time today. This has been great. King Cohen is a wonderful film, and I hope everyone goes sees it. It's educational for those who don't know of Cohen. And you did a fantastic job. Thank you.
I really appreciate it. Thanks. And I do try and get back to you a couple times a year. So
great. Cool. All right. Well, we'll keep in touch. And So this has been Under the Radar. I'm your host, Randy Unger. I want to thank everyone for listening today. And we'll see you next time. Thanks so much, guys.